My name's Nick Rowley. I work with Robertsbridge. I spend most of my time in Sydney and a fair bit of my time in Southeast Asia and a bit of my time in Europe as well. This session is on partnerships. I think we've got a fantastic panel. I've been brought in as an able, hopefully able, wing-in, really, for the chairman of the Robertsbridge, Brendan May, who sadly couldn't be here because of a family issue in the UK. So I'm going to try my best. And we've got a superb panel. And the first thing I want to do is, rather than I just introduce them, I'd like to go from Jeremy all the way through to Harvey. And I'd like them to tell all of us their full name. I'm not interested in the inside leg measurement, but their full name and what their title is, and something interesting about themselves. I think I said somewhat flippantly, even the nicest meal that you've had in the last 3 weeks, but something interesting about themselves that might be related to sustainability or it might be related to something else. Jeremy.
Sorry, this might work. Can everyone hear me? Hi, my name is Jeremy Goon. I am the Chief Sustainability Officer of Wilmar International. Something interesting about myself, sustainability-wise. That's a difficult question to answer in terms of whether I think it's interesting or not. I've been extremely involved in a lot of the nature and wildlife conservation efforts that are very, very dear to my heart, which do occur in our operations. So there's a little ridge we have up in Sabah, in the northern part of Borneo, which we have a big conservation project for the endangered Asian cattle, which is a very little known species, and people don't really talk about it because they normally focus on the orangutans and other more iconic species. It's a project we've been involved in for the last 15 years. We're very proud of it. It's probably got the biggest wild population of endangered cattle anywhere in the world.
Hey, thanks, Jeremy. Thank you. That's a beautiful thing. Next.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jayanth Bhuvaraghan. I work as the Chief Corporate Mission Officer for Essilor International. At Essilor, we make spectacle lenses primarily, and we are in the business of giving good vision to everyone. So, interesting thing about myself, I've been actively interested in sustainability and building sustainable business models for I think over 10 years now, starting off in India from where I come from, and building those models were more as a necessity at that point of time. And then now we're scaling up all over the world, and that's what I do as the Chief Corporate Mission Officer.
Fantastic. Do you want me to tell me something interesting about yourself?
About myself?
Yeah, generally. What do you think the person right at the back there at that table next to the camera, if you wanted to say something really interesting about yourself, and it can be professionally or anything else, what would you say to them?
Well,
do you play chess? Do you play chess, or what? Do you play chess, or are you interested in tennis?
Well, I can guess that I follow cricket very closely because I come from India, and that's something which I'm very passionate about, although we don't seem to be doing very well right now.
Yep.
And I'm also a big fan of the All Blacks.
Oh, good. Oh, good. All right. Well, yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. We'll move on.
You asked for that one.
So some people have problems, but anyway. Samantha.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to see all of you here. I'm Samantha. I'm the president of Conjunct Consulting. What we do is primarily two things. We do management consulting for nonprofit organizations and social enterprises. We also do CSR consulting for companies who really want to push the envelope on how they can create better social impact. So the interesting thing about myself, I've had the benefit of a little bit of time to think about it, well, the first two panelists have shared. So I think for me, what's always driven me in a way is always the idea of bringing more people into the social sector. So the questions I ask myself is always, how can I get people interested in giving back and interested in taking up a cause and fighting for it? So I love having discussions where I tell somebody about a problem in the world and their eyes light up and say, how about we do this? How about we do that? And I think for me, that's always very inspiring and what has kept me going through the years.
Lovely, thank you. And finally, we've got Harvey from Monsanto. Harvey, tell me a little bit about your work. I know you gave me some words that I could have used in introducing you, but do it yourself and tell me something interesting about yourself as well.
Sure, thank you. And good morning, everyone. My name is Harvey Glick with Monsanto. We're an agricultural company focused on sustainable food security. I am responsible for policy and scientific affairs here in the Asia region. I have had the pleasure of living in 4 different countries. I have had the greater pleasure of visiting farmers in over 30 countries. And one of the great experiences of my career has been the chance to interact with farmers, big and small, technical, non-technical, to really gain a sense of what sustainability means to individual lives. And that's been the primary focus for me in Asia. I said I was from Canada, so of course I'm an avid hockey player, ice hockey player that is, and a snowboarder.
Wow, okay, there you go. We've got an ice hockey player, that's terrific. Now, in all the briefing notes that always goes out, and I think Global Initiatives have been enormously professional in the way in which they brief people for the sessions, there are a whole series of kind of provocative questions that people might want to address in their opening remarks. But rather than me kind of reeling those off, what I'd like to do is to ask each member of the panel, as a way of starting the session, to share with us their perspectives on the value that partnerships have brought to them in the work that they do, some of the pitfalls, and some of the factors that they think have really led to some successes in relation to work that they've done through partnerships. I think I might just go from Jeremy and go right the way through the panel again. I'd like to give people a little bit more than 3 minutes, maybe 4. But at the 4th minute, I will be not dancing around, but kind of making it clear that I'd like people to start wrapping up. So if you want to see some light and movement on the stage, just wait for people to talk too long and then you'll see some, because I'll start moving around. But we've got some really big companies here with very, very complex supply chains having to deal with a whole lot of very challenging issues in terms of their corporate reputation and the work that they do and whether they add value in terms of sustainability or whether they don't. And, you know, as a company, I suppose Wilmar has to navigate hundreds of stakeholders, has been very disliked amongst the environmental NGOs for a reasonably long time, but came out with a very, I think, quite bold zero deforestation policy, which came out just over a year ago. And, of course, a lot of that involved work with others. Jeremy maybe want to talk about that, whether it's the Forest Trust or it's the work of Greenpeace, etc. So, Jeremy, I'm really interested in hearing your perspective on those things. And, of course, you know, it goes without saying, kind of mention the haze at the moment. As a major palm oil company, your perspective on the haze and the role that working with others in terms of minimising fire, etc. That would also, I think, be really interesting to the audience. So, Jeremy.
Thank you. So, very easy questions that you've posed.
And remember, 4 minutes. 4 minutes.
As you mentioned, I think we deal with very complicated supply chains. Wilmar's business model, basically, what I always like to say, you know, deals with from the seed to the frying pan. So we actually deal with all parts of the supply chain, everything. We have operations in plantations to mills to the logistics of moving commodities all across the world, all in and towards also consumer products in various different countries as well. So I think dealing with smallholder farmers to dealing with consumer companies as well as banks, there's so many different stakeholders that need to also perhaps be aligned and sharing the same vision you have for sustainability. And that's not always the case. I think it's more difficult perhaps sometimes to deal with some of the smallholders that supply our mills because they are perhaps less prepared, less enlightened. Even some of the banks that we deal with sometimes perhaps don't have necessary standards which we feel would be encouraging to promote sustainability, especially in industry as controversial as ours. But we've been heartened to see the level of engagement between different stakeholders that has taken place, especially in the last 2 years. We actually announced our policy in December 2013, so it's actually been almost 2 years. One of the most challenging aspects of it was initially when we first announced our policy was to then engage with all our various different stakeholders. And we were a little bit surprised as to the level of engagement that was needed. I think when we first engaged with our suppliers, we'd, for example, engage with 100 suppliers, and there'd be perhaps 90 different interpretations of what our policy actually meant. So I think we perhaps underestimated the level of and the amount of engagement that would be needed with each one. I think working with organizations like the Forest Trust and various other civil society organizations was extremely important in this process. And I think, in my opinion, one of the most important things in this whole process is transparency, which has, again, intensified the level of engagement that we have with various different stakeholders, whether it's with civil society monitoring your implementation on the ground, to other stakeholders like financial institutions who have a big say in encouraging the flow of the commodity flow around the world. That's also extremely important. I know I have only 4 minutes, but perhaps people want to hear a little bit about the haze. As the previous speaker, Pak Agus, just now, who was talking about his company's practices, I think it's very similar policies and commitments that we have as well. With regards to the fire and haze, I think it's a systemic problem which needs to be dealt with by a whole range of stakeholders. And it's not something that just the private sector or the industry is able to solve. It also fully requires government engagement, which I think is one of the keys to solving the annual problem which we're all faced with some years more than most. It's very complex, and without more engagement across various different stakeholders, it's a problem which I think is going to be very difficult to solve. Well, we've been very encouraged with the President of Indonesia's recent remarks on an increased moratorium on peatland. That's extremely important because I think that is one of the major causes of the haze, and especially peatlands, because it's more difficult to also identify exactly where the fires are, because for a lot of the peatland fires, they may smolder underground for several days. So massive downpours over the last week, which has certainly brought some respite from the haze, still have hotspots in various parts of Indonesia because of these underground peat fires. So his remarks on a more intense moratorium on peatland development is certainly very welcome from the industry, and I think from us all.
Thank you, Jeremy. That was under 4 minutes, and I appreciate that. There'll be opportunity for questions afterwards. Indeed, it's the main reason why I'm asking people to be so concise. So if people have got questions, I don't really want to use the flat screen, if that's okay. So if you want to lift your heads, use your brains, write down something on your pad, and then after we've heard from the next 3 speakers, I'd be really keen to get questions from the floor. But of course, we're not going to let those questions go too long either, because we all need to eat. Jayanth,
Yeah.
give me your 4 minutes. Your perspective on partnerships.
Yeah,
And as I was saying earlier, if you can give us some examples, I think, of where you feel that things have been achieved that maybe couldn't have been achieved without working with outside parties to help you achieve those things.
Okay. I'll probably talk slightly differently about sustainable business models that we develop in developing countries through partnerships. And before I get into those business models, just to give you a brief about the industry and the challenge before us. You know, I work for the vision care industry, and we make spectacle lenses. So primarily, it's known that out of the 7.5 billion people living in this world, there are about 1/3 of them, 2.5 billion people, who actually have poor vision and have no access to vision. And this has big consequences, socioeconomic consequences. Children in school, falling out of school, dropping out of school, elderly people, when you talk about elderly, 45, 50-year-old, just because they can't see near, lose their jobs, go back into poverty, excluded from societies. So there are huge problems which are there in many of these developing countries. On top of it, it has an economic consequence as well. The WHO estimated that the loss of productivity is about $275 billion every year, just because people can't have access to spectacles. Now, it's not about pricing because you have products at pricings which people can afford to buy. It's about connecting the dots. But then it's easier said than done. It's not just about taking a product and selling it wherever you want, because you need trained manpower. You need infrastructure to actually deliver primary vision care or eye care at the last mile, at each and every village and wherever there are people. You need primary vision care. And this is a massive task, and it's not easy for governments to invest on primary vision care and healthcare facilities everywhere, because they have many other priorities and many other governments have other things to do as well. So we believe as private sector, we could play a role in terms of developing this primary vision care, and we work with partners. What we actually do is we work on empowering people. We work on empowering people by skilling them, by training them. So we know that in countries like India and also in other Indonesia and many other places, you have a lot of young population who are either unemployed or underemployed, living in villages, who are actually going into the cities and putting a strain on the cities and not able to earn enough. So we actually take them, train them over a period of 8 months, and then at the end of the training, give them a kind of a small grant to help them to go back to their own villages and start their own micro enterprises or become micro entrepreneurs. So this is the whole objective of what we do. And in order to do this, obviously, even large companies like ours with enough resources can't do it alone. And this is where we actively work with partnerships. So we have partnerships of many kinds. For instance, we are partners with the governments. So in India, we work with the state government in Rajasthan, which actually funds the whole training because they find this as a great model. The Prime Minister himself has talked about skill building as one of the priorities for the country. We work with development banks who actually partner in these initiatives because they find this as a unique and sustainable model, so they finance us for that. We work with partners who are NGOs who actually have the connections at the last mile, but they don't have the resources to kind of scale it up. So we work with them to kind of do partnerships there. We also work with other private sector companies in terms of partnering this. And we believe that the more partners we have, the faster we can reach out to the millions of people and just give them access to something as simple as a pair of spectacles, which will help them to actually not just see better, actually earn more money and gain more respect in their society. So this is our model.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That was very compelling. Now, Samantha, tell me a little bit about what you do, because I think that what you do absolutely involves bringing different groups together.
So a large part of what we do is really to be able to bring both the corporate sector, together the social sector, and the governmental sector to be able to push forward solutions that will help to solve social problems. So I know that sounds really vague, so I'm just going to give you kind of an example of this. So one of the key partnerships that we've managed to foster is working with the National Environment Agency in Singapore, together with the environmental non-profit organizations who are doing great research and implementing initiatives on the ground, and bringing together a global PR agency who's able to multiply the impact and the awareness raised through their initiatives. So we're able to bring in the tripartite sector together to be able to kind of raise awareness about government agencies, about environmental issues, to be able to get more people thinking about it. And this is one example of how partnerships can be really powerful. So the reason why this partnership works is primarily because different sectors have different access to different information. So the government agencies have a lot of information in terms of what the environmental trends are, in terms of what has been the impact of consumer trends have been on the global and national environmental issues. On the other side, the corporates have a lot of strengths and access to the information, how their own internal workings have an impact on the environment. And of course, the non-profit sector is the one who has been raising a lot of awareness and doing a lot of research in this area as well. So by bringing the three parties together, we're actually able to tap on different sources of information and to really push forward a combined agenda. So that's actually primarily my first point of what makes partnership work, is really the access to information. And so what Conjunct has done as well on a more national scale is actually to conduct a pan-Asia survey on the needs of the social sector, as well as the kind of support that corporates and individual volunteers can provide. We have worked with partners in China, as well as India and Thailand, etc., to actually get more information on these areas. And people who come to us is primarily to find out more in terms of how they can support the social sector, what are the needs of the social sector, Or conversely, how can they better leverage on the corporate assets that the companies that they work with can provide? So where Conjunct comes in is to really play a bridge in these two areas. So I think the other benefits of partnership is really also being able to multiply what you can do. And part of this is really to gather the aligned. So not only do you need to form partnerships that have a sustainable mutual interest, but you also need to have form partnerships where your missions are aligned. And that's not always easy. Because many times companies are driven by a profit bottom line, while nonprofits are driven by a social mission. And governments are always driven by political agendas. So how do you then merge all of these or find that convergence points to be able to push forward these new initiatives and partnerships? And how do you really create that kind of partnership that will work? One thing that we've found is very important in sustaining partnerships is impact assessment. Being able to then communicate back to the different stakeholders what their impact has been and what their benefits of the initiative that they are working on can bring to them and has brought to them. So a continual cycle of impact assessment, of evaluating how the programs have benefited all stakeholders within that partnership is very important in being able to sustain it. Because you must remember that as we talk to partners, each partner is also made out of multiple stakeholders that they then need to get buy-in from or then need to persuade that this is a valuable endeavor for them. And being able to come up with statistics in terms of qualitative as well as quantitative data to support that in terms of what they're getting out of the partnership is really important in being able to sustain it in the long run.
Excellent. 3 minutes, 58 seconds.
Wow. Done.
There you go. Come on, Harvey. See if you can better that.
Sure.
You've got 2 more seconds than Samantha had.
Sure. My company is an agricultural company, and it's surprising to some that it's actually quite a high-tech company. We have about 22,000 employees, and we have about 4,000 who are PhD. So we have a high geek factor in our company, but we've learned quite a long time ago that we can't address these big challenges of growing food more sustainably by ourselves, and the value of partnerships is critical. We've engaged on partnerships with a range of stakeholders, including nonprofits. We work with the Gates Foundation. We've worked with non-campaigning NGOs in the sustainability area. We work with governments. We work with universities. And we work with other private organizations. Like you probably all have a lot of experience with partnerships. They are really hard to do. They're easy to say, but hard to do. And it's really hard to get all the way through and realize the objectives that you set out at the very beginning. So I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of public-private partnerships. Fortunately, there are some examples that work, and when they work really well because you get results that neither party could have achieved on their own. So I would hopefully over the course of the afternoon and lunch, I'd love to hear from you on some of the things that work well for you. We are currently involved in a very interesting partnership in Sumatra, where we're trying to help small farmers in a very remote area of natural Sumatran forest figure out the most effective way to manage their landscape in a sustainable way. And the deforestation is a huge issue there. And we have been trying to work with that community to figure out how we can reduce deforestation. And of course, one of the problems is they don't get enough productivity and profitability on the land that they do farm. So we've taken a twofold approach with this NGO that we're working with, teach them the importance and the value of that forest, cordon it off, train them not to cut it down, and at the same time working with them, teaching them how they can increase their productivity and their profitability on the land they do have in agriculture today. So we're only 2 years into this project. It's still very early days, but I have to say this is one that's really making me feel good about public-private partnerships because it's working really well. We've established trust with our partner. We've got the government on board. And we've had a chance to visit some of these very small farmers in this remote area, and we're beginning to see it's having some impact. So I'd be glad to share with you more examples of what's working, what's not working with regard to these partnerships. But it's really exciting that we have one right now in this part of Asia that's working very well.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Harvey. We have 10 minutes to go. I just want to ask one question of each of the panelists. I'd really like to get their perspective on this because it isn't something that I've heard from them, and I thought I would. And then I'd like to throw it open to you to ask questions. And all I'd ask of the questions is keep the questions relevant to what you've heard and relevant to the subject matter. I'd like them to be questions, not statements. And I'd like the questions to be as short as possible because we do want to all enjoy lunch at 1 o'clock. Trust. That's the word I didn't hear any of you use. And I suppose one perspective one can take on the value of partnerships is if you want to achieve certain ends, to do that with other partners helps build trust. You have to have some measure of trust between the partners. But also if you want to assist with human health and you're partnering with the Gates Foundation, you want to help tackle deforestation, you're working with the Forest Trust, or you're working with another human development NGO, is that when someone says, oh, I work for Monsanto and we're doing a lot of really good things, and I'm working with the Gates Foundation, I suppose for each of you, and Jennifer, with your breadth of experience, to what extent do you think partnerships are a really important way that large businesses wanting to do positive things in terms of sustainability and human development can actually help build that trust with those out there in the real world that they want to think well of the business? Maybe, Harvey, if you could respond first, and then I'll go the other way. I'll go Jeremy last.
Sure. So there are three things that I have learned that are really important in a good, successful partnership. The first one is trust, as I mentioned, and you reinforced. Second one is trust, and the third one is trust. If you don't have that foundation of trust, all the other attributes that are required for a partnership, like complementary expertise and all that, shared goals, will not be successful. And one of the things that I can share is a colleague of mine was very concerned that one of the NGOs we wanted to partner with on this Sumatra project spent about 6 months doing due diligence on our company to see if we were really committed to sustainability or this was just a greenwash project. And they actually wanted to come to our internal sustainability meetings, they wanted to talk to our leadership, and they wanted to really find out if we were committed to this. And my colleague at my company was a little bit put off by that he thought this NGO didn't trust us. I was thrilled that they took that time to do the due diligence and find out that we had shared goals and shared commitments on sustainability, because then you can begin to have that foundation of trust. And once you have that established, then you can begin to work on all the differences in timing, perception, approach that the different stakeholders have, and you've got to get over. The private sector always wants to go really, really fast and urgent and bigger and better. And sometimes the stakeholders want to work in a much more controlled and slow and thoughtful process. So you've got to work through all those differences. But to your point, if you have that foundation of trust, all things are possible. And without that, it's going to be a very long and difficult partnership.
Harvey, thanks very much. I just want to ask one follow-up question, because I think what you said was coherent and clear and wonderful. And I suppose any positive relationship must be based at some measure on trust, and I understand that. And when we're talking about the relationship between an external party and the business itself. But I'd be interested in your take about the extent to which a successful partnership for Monsanto. So when you want to tell people about the good things that you're doing in terms of supporting farming, halting deforestation within a complex environment like Sumatra, to what extent when you talk externally about what Monsanto does, when you can then point to the partnerships that you have with other agents, does that actually help build trust between the business and the people out there who you want to feel positively about Monsanto?
It does, and the way you do that is by inviting them to participate. So we've brought so many government officials to come and talk to the farmers in this region of Pak Barat in Sumatra, and talk to the farmers who are getting training, getting education on how to grow crops better, how to protect their forest. They're learning to see how the local village leaders are engaging. When they come and see the commitment of all the parties, it really does create a better understanding of what companies are trying to do to make agriculture more sustainable in their areas where they can have some impact.
Excellent, thank you. Samantha.
So the question of trust is a very interesting one. It's also very important because for us, a large part of our work is fostering trust between the two parties, between the companies that we work with and the nonprofits that we match them with. And trust comes even before we go in to establish that relationship. So for ourselves, if we come in as an intermediary, we also think, and when we talk to companies, we ask them, what is it that you are looking for? What are your objectives around this? And we also get a little bit of a sense of what kind of values they place. So whether they're looking for something that's very much in terms of a wide scale, where it's helping a lot of people, but not so much a sustained relationship with each one, or whether or not it's a matter of really picking one or two organizations and doing a deep dive with them. So these things are things that we consider as well when we think about who we should match them with. And because if there is a misalignment in objectives or in values even, then there will also be very little trust. So I think trust comes even before in being able to do your homework in the sense of understanding the organizations that you're working with. And eventually when you do match them and there is a partnership there, then it's a lot easier to then foster trust. I also want to talk a little bit about examples in terms of how trust is also centered around certain sensitivities, more so than whether or not there is inherent trust between the two organizations. So a common one that companies do come to us and request of us is that they want us to work more with the nonprofits or the NGOs that they're already working with. So it could be the company has a philanthropic relationship with the organization, and they bring us in to say, okay, how can we work more with them? Because sometimes the NGOs or nonprofits are less willing to share their needs and their troubles with the company who's giving them funding. And that's where we can actually come in to play kind of a neutral, objective way to balance both sides and be able to communicate that in a way that continues to foster the trust in the relationship. So I think what this comes in is also, what this shows is also the sense that sometimes we do need an intermediary who can help to build that trust, especially in the initial stages of establishing the relationship and having that partnership going.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Now, I'm changing the rules because I'm the chairman. And I think we're going to finish at 5 past because I'm really keen that we do get some time for questions. And I'd ask, I mean, it's a little indulgent of me because I just find the whole question of how you establish trust as a brand or a government or anything else intrinsically interesting because there are a whole lot of new ways of doing that. Trust me, I'm the government. Trust me, I'm Monsanto. Possibly doesn't wash that well until you can say, trust me, I'm the government, and these are the 3 agents that we're working with to achieve this outcome. So it's just a little bit indulgent of me. But the perspectives of Jayanth and then Jeremy, just on the trust question, and then we'll go to the floor. So please do have your questions ready. Joe.
Yeah, so when we approach partnerships, and we're talking about partnerships of building sustainable models of primary vision care in deep parts of India, China, wherever, I think the first thing which we look for is more than trust. Before we get into trust, is the alignment of the purpose of the mission. Because why are they actually getting into partnership with us? So many times small NGOs come to companies because they're looking for a big check, or some other times it's some other reasons. But then I think it's primarily, are they really aligned with the mission of actually bringing vision care to people? And we Essilor are also not looking at selling lenses there, because most often than not there are products of other competitors who are sold there. But really it's the purpose behind bringing vision care, and this is of prime importance to us. I think that we approach it that way. Obviously the second thing is the commitment, which you mentioned, and I think it's very, very important, because again, it's not partnership for the short term. It's something which you're building it for the next 5, 10, 15 years. You're not like going to get in, do a small project, get a newspaper headline and walk out, because you really are looking at creating value in the society. And this commitment is absolutely, absolutely key for us. And so for us, when we approach partnerships, for us it's like any business partnership or joint venture that you would do, you look at the business case per se. So this sustainability is no different. Whether it's philanthropy, inclusive business or whatever, it's all about the business case and how strong it is and what each one of us bring into the table. And if that makes sense, much more than the financial part, if that makes sense, and there's a compelling business case, then we get into partnerships. And as we go along, and trust is absolutely important, it's very difficult to establish trust in your first meeting or when you read about people on the internet and stuff like that. It takes time. You actually build relationships, and then there are many things which you have to unlearn and learn with them and things like that. And this is a process which comes in. Once you have, I think, strong alignment of purpose, commitment, and a strong business case, and then you make it happen, you make it work. This has been our experience, actually.
Thanks. Jeremy?
Thanks. I think this issue of trust is extremely important because especially in the industry that I deal with. I think there are lots of people who will say, are you sure you're doing what you say you're doing? In January of this year, we actually had a bit of a sort of paradigm shift. We were the first, I think, company, certainly in this sector, to launch a sustainability dashboard. That showed all of our refineries exactly where they got all of their palm oil from. And that traced back the flows to over 880 mills across Malaysia and Indonesia, which is more than half of the production of the world. And I think it was perhaps a little bit of a bold move at that point in time. We were perhaps a little bit uncertain because we were the first to actually do something like that. But it was, I think, this level of transparency which brings along with it a level of trust. Because if we've got nothing to hide, we're showing you exactly where it comes from. It's not like you had in the past where you would have, many years ago when certain customers would ask, where does my palm oil come from? How can I be sure it's de-linked from deforestation, various other human rights and exploitation issues? And many years ago, many suppliers, including ourselves, wouldn't be able to tell you exactly where your oil would come from. That's all changed today. And I think that more and more companies are being more and more transparent. That's extremely important because that also allows other stakeholders who perhaps are on the ground, who perhaps know a little bit more about certain conflicts in certain communities which are in and around the areas that go into your supply chain, to be able to come forward and to also, for example, launch a grievance. We also have a grievance procedure which came along with our dashboard. So if anyone has a grievance against any of our suppliers or even ourselves, they are free to launch a grievance on the dashboard itself, and we will follow up with every single grievance, and there will be an update on every single grievance that is launched. So I think this level of transparency certainly brings about a greater level of trust, which I think is extremely important for us going forward, that we have nothing to hide.
Yeah, thank you very much. Questions? Got 5 minutes. Lady with her hand up at the back. If you could just say your name and where you're from.
Yep. Vivian, Philanthropy Works, and Young Global Leaders. Jeremy, how much do you pay your smallholders per hectare of yield?
Per hectare of yield?
Yep.
That's a very strange way of putting it.
I can share why I asked the question.
Please.
After you answer.
There isn't a per hectare of yield.
Okay.
There is a market price for fresh fruit bunches.
I see. Okay, so what would that translate to, or what is the price you pay them?
Whatever the market price is the world of commodities.
What was it for the most recent season?
Well, you have the CPO price today at about $500 a ton.
Yes, I know that.
So why do you want a figure, is my question.
Okay, because, ladies and gentlemen, it costs $400, allegedly, to clear 1 hectare of land. If the price smallholders are paid is below that, we're asking them to starve their families to produce that yield. Is that a real choice?
Sorry, I think you've got your figures all wrong as well, because when you plant an oil palm tree into the land, it lasts for 25 years. That's how long the cycle is.
Okay.
And if it wasn't economic, they wouldn't be doing it all over Indonesia.
Well,
if it didn't make money, they wouldn't be doing it all over Indonesia.
Well, I did not say they were not making money. But I think in a number of developing countries, frankly, I'm sure your clients like Paul Pullman would appreciate this as well. So you weren't the only one that I met at the World Economic Forum, obviously. So it is possible for people to pick the one choice they have if that's the only way they can feed their families. And sometimes that choice, okay, let me put it this way. If the price they are paid, X, right, since that's so mysterious at this point.
Can I just ask you, okay, because I do think that it's a really important debate, and I think the questions you raise are really important. They are particularly important for your concerns about Wilmar, okay? So all I'd say is just in the spirit of the actual session itself, I would go back to what I said earlier. So what I said earlier was let's have a question, and let's make it pertinent to what we've heard.
It was a question, but it was not addressed.
Okay, well, give me a question.
I've given you the answer.
Yeah,
to
he's
your
given
question.
you. I mean, if
You
it's,
need to translate it to what the smallholders are paid for the yield from 1 hectare of land.
I don't know what their yield is per hectare of land because different smallholders and different companies have different yields per hectare. It also
If you
depends
don't
on the
know-
quality of seeds.
Jeremy, I don't want to get into a debate with you either, okay?
Okay.
but you can get into a debate.
You
with
can.
him, but
I'm
maybe just not
happy to
here.
get into a debate with you. But
I
if we
know
want to go
I
into
can, but I do not want to get into a debate.
So what is the point?
What I would like is clarification. Now, you are in charge of sustainability and you are part of the senior leadership of Wilmar, right?
Yes, so I'm willing
For
to
you to
answer your
claim-
question.
Yes. For you to claim sustainability in your supply chain, you need to pay your smallholders above their cost of clearing the land sustainably. If they are not paid more than the clearing price, more than the price they require to sustainably clear the land, then they are forced to clear it unsustainably or to subsidize you. Poor little guy subsidizing a multi-billion-dollar company, that's unheard of, right? So what is the other choice they have? The other way is 1 liter of fuel. And in an El Nino year, you only need a cigarette butt, sometimes. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who live and work in Southeast Asia, we're actually not done with this season because El Nino this year is very strong. The last time it was this strong, there was a relapse after the rains in November.
Okay.
And I do not represent just myself. I am in touch with senior government leaders, senior corporate leaders, ambassadors, and so on. We are building a coalition. We'll work with whoever will work with us.
Okay, that's good.
And at low tide, we'll see the rest.
Okay, I'll take that as a statement, a concluding statement from you, but I can't really speak for Jeremy, but I'm sure he'd be willing to have a further conversation with you on that. Other questions? Man with his hand up, wearing a light shirt.
Hello, this is Chris from
Sorry. There are 2 men wearing white shirts. I was looking at that one. I was going to say that he had less hair, but then I thought that would be rude. So I want the fellow with the greying side bits.
This one, me?
Yeah, you.
I've got grey hair and no hair,
Yeah.
A good start, thank you.
Okay, look, we're going over time a little bit. But
Well, and Jeremy, I'm sorry, this one's for you as well.
Sure.
I would have asked this of Agus earlier, but I didn't get the chance, so maybe I'll direct this to you.
Can you say where you're from and what your name is?
Sorry, my name's Patrick. I'm a TV producer from the Imagine Group, so a lot of smarter people in this room, so excuse me if I'm demonstrating some ignorance, but some things seem a little simple for me hearing this for the first time. Agus said that over 50% of the palm oil plantations are privately owned small farmers, and yet only 7% of his palm fruit acquisition comes from those farmers in a 50-kilometre radius. It seems quite conceivable that he could easily take a leadership role to improve the reputation of your industry by simply saying, we won't buy products from farmers who use burning practices anymore. You can see in a 50-kilometre radius, that would be a pretty easy thing to do. And it seems that there's no spirit of doing that voluntarily. Maybe it'll have to be mandatory to make a simple decision like not purchasing 7%. Now, can you tell me a little bit about your purchasing practices? And is it on your agenda to improve the reputation of your whole industry by simply saying, we will no longer buy products from farmers who use burning practices? It seems like a pretty simple thing to do if the industry is dominated by 5 companies, okay, that for the large part run the industry, and it appears from what your industry is saying, you're not responsible for the burning practices.
Okay, thank you for that. So Jeremy, you respond, then I'm going to take one more question, and then we're going to go for lunch. And the question will be from the fellow there, but I'll take that question after Jeremy has a chance to respond to what was a pretty clear question.
Yes, very clear question, and the answer is yes, we will not be purchasing from anyone who burns. That is part of our policy. And yes, it's an extremely important role that perhaps these 5 big players have to play in the industry. But it's a little bit more complicated than that, because you also have many, many other players. I think these 5 players constitute less than 10% of the actual production So you still have another 90% who produce palm oil, apart from these big 5 companies. So you have a situation where in order to have a truly transformative effect on the industry, you need buy-in from all the others as well. And of course, smallholders represent 50%, 40, 50% of the production. So I think a lot more capacity building and awareness needs to be done with regards to all of the smallholders and all of the people who feed into the various different mills. It's a little bit more complex than just 5 people dictating exactly what should happen. And of course, you've had certain pushback from certain government quarters who think that there should be more smallholder development without giving any specific details. So I think, yes, it's extremely important that the companies who have a leadership role are very clear in their policies and specifically to say that we will not be buying from farmers who are burning. And that's why we have our sustainability dashboard, which shows exactly which mills we are purchasing from. And if we find that these mills are involved in burning, they will be excluded from our supply chain. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Gentleman in the centre. Is it a question to Jeremy or is it a question to other members of the panel or a general question?
I can address the question to 2 of the speakers, Jeremy and the representative from Monsanto.
Yeah, that's good. I just did feel that we had 3 people on the platform who were part of the Jeremy Goon show, and I didn't want that to happen. So,
it can be a more general question as well. Okay.
Yeah. Could you say your name and where you're from?
Okay, I'm Chris from People's Movement to Stop Haze. Again, sorry, haze topic again. We have a campaign called "We Breathe What We Buy," and we encourage consumers to support sustainable palm oil. Yeah, so we are willing to partner with corporations to really differentiate the sustainable palm oil and non-sustainable palm oil, or sustainable paper and non-sustainable paper. But this has to come with evidence. Just now, the discussion also about trust.
Yep.
So before the trust comes in, we need to have evidence, KPI, measurable KPIs, which can help to differentiate the good and the bad. So that we are definitely willing to work with the good companies, responsible companies.
Got a question?
Yeah, so the question is for Jeremy, what will be the measurable KPIs you have in mind, and whether those KPIs can be applied across not only the palm oil sector, but also the pulp and paper sectors. And for the Harvey, it's good to hear that Monsanto is trying to promote sustainability and to reduce the deforestation through productivity boosting. So we also would like to learn more, for example, from the life cycle impact, because although we understand genetic modified crops perhaps can improve the yield, but in terms of life cycle or throughout the plant life cycle, or even through a longer period over a few cycles of the plantation, so what will be the impact to the soil? All this has to be taken into consideration.
Okay, so Harvey, do you want to respond to the life cycle question first, and then Jeremy, if you want to respond to the other element of the question?
Yeah. So I'm not sure I fully understand. You kind of went off from haze into life cycle on biotechnology, so I didn't see the connection. But I want to come back to your KPIs, because I think that's very important. And before I let Jeremy take this over, I want to share with you the partnership we have in Sumatra. We've only been able to touch about 200 or 300 farmers so far, but our metrics were very simple. Protect forest land and increase the productivity and profitability of the farmers that we're able to touch. Here's our KPI measurement after 2 years. 2,000 hectares of forest have now been conserved by a combination of education and signing agreements by these local village farmers. Farm productivity increased by 30 to 100% for key crops like corn and coffee. Farmer income, that their return increased by 34%. So we do measure KPIs. If we're not meeting our KPIs, we have to change the approach to the partnership so that it will get back on track. Very important. It's only 2 years, so we don't want to get too excited. We want to see how this will progress over time. Hopefully, this will be a model for governments in Indonesia to look at so they can adapt this in their broader policy assessments on how to best use sustainable landscapes across Sumatra.
Thanks, Harvey. Jeremy, do you want to respond to
Yeah,
this?
sure. And with regards to your question, I think one of the most measurable ways of determining whether it comes from a sustainable source today is actually with the Roundtable for Sustainable Palm Oil Certification. The issue that you have there is that only about 20% of the world's production is certified by the Roundtable. But that is probably the only measurable way today that is perhaps more, universally accepted by most stakeholders, that you can determine whether it comes from a sustainable source or not. And for Wilmar's own popular plantations, we have 80% already certified, and for all of our smallholders, we will get certification for them by 2017 as well. So in terms of actual sustainable standards and the certification, it's the Roundtable.
Jeremy, thank you very much. Before the session started, I said to somebody next to me, I'd like to make this a lively session and a feisty session and something that keeps people awake before lunchtime. And I think we've sort of succeeded in that. And I also said to everybody on the panel, we're very intolerant of platitudes, and I don't think we heard terribly many. And let's just remember that this is a forum. And if you are willing to expose yourself as a business in a forum, then you're exposing yourself to questioning. And you don't know what those questions are going to be. And I think that it was great that there were some really direct questions on some really very important matters. And many of those conversations hopefully will continue after this session. But I would just like you all to put your hands together and thank our panel.